before I was even born. It was my mother who raised me alone against the world. I was 10 years old that Christmas. My mother, Erica, had just finished preparing dinner. It was simple: mashed potatoes, roast chicken, and his special apple pie. She had 2 jobs. Christmas Eve was one of the few nights she could sit down and smile a little. The lights on the tree flickered red and green, like little stars reflected in the windows. I remember her beaming face when she handed me a sugar cane and said, "Merry Christmas, my little man." Everything was fine until there was a knock on the door. It was almost 00. Deke, Mom frowned. "It's strange that it can be so late. We won't do it any harder this time." "Stay here," Noah whispered before going to the door. "Which is that?" Oh. "Merry Christmas, madam. A delivery for your family." My mother's brow furrowed. I didn't order anything. My mother looked through the peephole, and I saw her face pale, her eyes wide. But before she could speak, the man outside started banging on our door like a desperate one. I screamed, not understanding what was happening. My mother told me to hide, but I was paralyzed with fear. After a few hard knocks, our door gave way. Mom hugged me, and we backed into a corner, seeing a man in a bloody Santa suit enter, his eyes seeming empty as if absent. That's how we greet Santa. He grunted. In his gloved hand gleamed a long kitchen knife under the Christmas lights. Mom pushed the table against him, knocking down cornoa plates. I froze. The man leapt, knocking the table over as if it weighed nothing. Mom grabbed my arm and pulled me into the kitchen. We ran, her bare feet sliding on the ground, my sugar cane still in my hand. She suddenly opened the door of the guard. "Quickly, eat in." We huddled together, surrounded by cereal boxes and flour skins. She closed the door and pressed her hand to her mouth, whispering, "Don't make a noise." Through the slats I saw her prowling in the kitchen. "I know you're hiding. Santa Claus sees everything." Mom was shaking, but her eyes were bright. She looked out the back window, a few feet from the pantry. It was small, the kind that opens barely enough for a child to fit in. As soon as the man's footsteps receded towards the cellar, Mama guided me to the window, kissed me on the forehead, and whispered, "Listen to me, baby. You need to get out that window and run to the neighbors. Don't stop. Don't turn around. Tell them to call the police." "No, Mom," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "Come with me." She shook her head, tears in her eyes as well. "I won't pass. Just do what Mommy says, okay?" I climbed on the counter and pushed the window open. The cold hit my face like blades. I turned around, and there I saw him. A shadow moving behind me. Mom. The man comes out of the basement door, grabs her from behind. The knife gleamed as he pulled it back, laughing. "Where are you two going? Christmas has just started. She's here now. Noah is going away." The man grabbed me by the collar then, trying to pull me too, but Mom wouldn't let him. She kept kicking. She clawed at his face, blood running down his cheek. As she pulled a handful of his hair, the man screamed in rage and let go of me, turning all his fury on her. I fell into the snow and ran barefoot through the garden behind me. I could hear glass breaking, furniture breaking, and my mother screaming. The neighbor's house was 2 doors away. I knocked on the door. When Harris opened, I was shaking so hard I couldn't speak. "A man, Mom, is injured. Called the police." He called 911 immediately. I remember hiding under their tree while they locked the doors and turned off the lights. The sirens came a minute later, but it seemed to last for hours. When the police arrived at our house, they found the front door broken and the living room trashed. The Christmas tree was toppled, broken decorations scattered on the floor. The man, dressed as Santa Claus, lay unconscious by the fireplace, bleeding from the head. Mom had hit her with the heavy brass candlestick from the fireplace. Police said she fought like a lioness, but did not survive. They found her slumped next to him, the knife still stuck in her side. She had lost too much blood before help arrived. The cops found a picture of me crumpled in his palm. In her final moments, she thought of me. It's been 2 decades since that night. Officers later informed me that the man had fled a psychiatric hospital nearby and had stolen the Santa outfit at a drive hours before entering our home. He survived the blow to the head, but has been confined to a secure facility ever since. Sometimes, I wonder if he remembers what he did that night in our house, the horror he brought. But most of all, I wonder if Mom realized how brave she was then, sacrificing herself so I could live. Christmas music now feels unbearable to me. Every night I ask him why those who want to stay must leave, why the ones who truly care are the ones we lose. The questions haunt me, lingering in my heart. What my father left and never returned, disregarding Mom or her son, it broke us. And yes, the one who gave everything to her son met such a harsh fate. How can life be so unforgiving? Christmas in our home used to be quiet and warm, just the 3 of us. Mom, Dad, and me. Small parties filled with movies, board games, laughter, and pretending to enjoy Mom and Dad's overcooked cookies. That Christmas felt strange. Dad announced a guest would be joining us, a cousin from his mother's side whom he hadn't seen in years. His name was George. When George arrived, he seemed peculiar. Tall, bulky, thinning gray hair. His fixed gaze and excessive blinking unsettled me. He carried an old trench coat and a basic duffel bag, his presence tinged with oddity. "Dylan, I've heard so much about you," he said, pulling me into an uncomfortable hug before I could react. His breath lingered too close, and I pulled away, forcing a strained smile. Mom exchanged a puzzled look with Dad, who merely shrugged. Dinner was tense as George spoke non-stop, his words filling the awkward silence. George frequently asked me odd questions. My age, if I had a girlfriend. His intent gaze as he asked left me uneasy. His eyelids flickered rapidly like wings, making his face eerily unsettling. At one point, he reached out to touch my hair and said, "You have strong features. You remind me of someone." I muttered an excuse and backed away, retreating to my room. Mom called out, asking if I was fine. I lied, saying I was just tired, but the truth was, I despised him. I stayed locked in my room, headphones on, trying to block out the sounds from downstairs. Sleep came eventually, but just after midnight, I woke up. Faint footsteps drew near, hesitating right outside my door. My stomach churned with unease. The handle turned slowly, and the door creaked open. There, silhouetted by the light of the corridor, stood Uncle George. He was wearing a Santa suit, not a cheap one. She looked old and dusty, her beard hung crooked, and in her hands he held a red bag. "What are you doing?" stammering. He smiled as he approached. "Santa Claus brought a present for his favorite boy. You have to go," I say. His voice trembling, he ignored me, put down the bag, dipped his hand into it, and pulled out a small wrapped box. He handed it to me again, blinking frantically. Then another. "Come on," he murmured. "Just one more hug for Santa." That's when I screamed, a ripping scream coming straight out of my chest. Mom and Dad came running, the light in the hallway came on, and my father's voice thundered. "What are you doing here?" George flinched but did not back away. His hands trembled now, his wavering smile. "It doesn't matter," he says softly. "He knows me. We've always been close." Papa jumped up and pushed him back violently. "Get out of my house, George." Mom grabbed my arm, pulling me out of bed. I could barely breathe. George's Santa hat fell off as he staggered toward the door. His face was pale, his gaze vague. "You don't understand," he muttered, staring at me. "I've known him since he was born. Yell at Daddy again. Get out before I call the cops." George stepped back, smiling faintly, teeth yellow and crooked. "You've always been my favorite. Dylan says you always have been." Then he turned around and walked out like that, down the stairs, through the front door in the snow. Dad locked it behind him and immediately called the police. When the agents arrived, George was gone. They searched the area and patrolled the neighborhood, but there was no sign of him. His car was still parked outside, engine cold, but the driver's seat empty. The sports bag he had brought was also gone. One of the police officers stayed to take statements. I was on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, my hands shaking. Mom cried in the kitchen while Dad explained what he knew. Not much. He said George had called him, introducing himself as a distant cousin who had gone abroad. He seemed harmless, just a lonely old man trying to reconnect. My father never doubted, but when the police checked, no George with our name existed in our family records, either on Dad's side or anywhere else. No ID, no trace, nothing. The box George had tried to give me was still on my nightstand. The officer took it as evidence, but allowed my parents to open it later. Inside, a picture of a newborn, wrapped in a blue blanket with a scrawled back. My parents claimed that the photo was not from them. It wasn't even taken at the hospital where I was born. For weeks I saw flashes of that night, his face, the red suit, his voice. When he said my name, I slept with the light until February. The police never found him. Sometimes I tell myself he was just a crazy person who went to the wrong house, but I know that's not true. He knew too much. He knew me. I will never forget the Christmas sleepover when I was 12. It had to be perfect. Hot chocolate, matching pajama movie, and laughing with friends until 12 o'clock. My father had done the maximum that year. He put lights on the porch, hung stockings by the fireplace, and rented a snow machine for the garden. My best friends, Emily and Harper, arrived around 6 p.m. We baked cookies, turned the kitchen upside down, and built a cover fort. Everything in the living room seemed warm and cozy and secure. Around 00 on 12, in our fort in front of Mom, I missed plane 2. Emily froze and whispered that there was someone at the window. Harper and I turned to the window. At first, I didn't see anything. Then I saw him just behind the frosted window, standing by the trees at the back of the garden. A man. He was wearing a Santa costume. He didn't move. Right there, watching us. His face glowed red from the garlands on the fence, making him even more creepy. Harper laughed nervously, saying Dad might be trying to scare us. I really wanted to believe it. But Dad was upstairs folding the laundry, and that motionless figure didn't seem like a joke. We ran to the stairs and called her Daddy. There's someone outside. He came right down half smiling, like we were exaggerating. Lils, it's probably a neighbor walking his dog, but when he looked out the window, the man was gone. See, Dad said, just shadows playing tricks. We went back to the fort, but no one could concentrate on the film. The slightest crack made us jump. I was trying to look brave for my friends, but deep down, this image of Santa in the snow haunted me. About half an hour later, something else was heard. A thud, then another from above, then long, deliberate footsteps on the roof. Harper screamed. Emily began to cry. I was frozen, staring at the ceiling. Dad burst out of his room screaming, "What's going on?" He was told someone was on the roof. He grabbed his jacket and flashlight, muttering something about raccoons, and ran outside. We watched out the front window as he walked around the house, the beam of his flashlight Dad's face when he pointed the lamp up. His voice dropped into a whisper that opened the window. We all froze. There was a small round window in the attic, and it was pushed out. Snowflakes were coming in, and snow tracks led from the window into the darkness of the attic. Dad's voice was shaking when he said, I'm calling the police. Before they got here, Dad got under the attic with a baseball bat. He sensed someone was in the attic. When the police finally arrived, they searched the property, starting with the attic. They stayed there maybe 5 minutes before one of them screamed that someone was hiding behind the old boxes. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't help myself. They took a man down the ladder, our neighbor. He was wearing a Santa coat, the hat still on his head, and his hands handcuffed behind his back. His face was pale and sweaty, his eyes moving as if he were looking for a way out. Dad stood there, speechless. The Harlan had always seemed harmless, the quiet, solitary guy who greeted us when we picked up the mail. Sometimes he would bring us cookies or offer to clear our driveway. I never imagined that The officer opened the bag they found with him. Inside were our clothes, pajamas, socks, and even underwear. They also found a Polaroid with a stack of photos taken without our knowledge. Harlan would photograph us as we changed and hide in the attic to set up a camera in my room. When the cops asked him why, he smiled and said, "Santa always watches nice girls." The whole room went silent. Dad put his hand on my shoulder and hugged me. I've never seen him so pale. I could feel him trembling with anger and disbelief. After taking Mr. Harlan away, the police stayed for a while, retrieving the cameras and taking prints. No one slept that night. Dad stayed with us until dawn, checking the locks every few minutes, apologizing incessantly, saying he should have believed us. That he should have noticed something sooner. At about 6:30 in the morning, the first light of Christmas Day crept through the blinds. Harper and Emily's parents came to pick them up. Dad made pancakes, but I couldn't eat them. I kept thinking about that red suit and his boots on the roof and Harlan's creepy smile. Later that day, a detective called to say Harlan had been doing this for years. Breaking into homes, filming families, and collecting souvenirs. They found dozens of tapes of young girls and boys in his basement. I didn't dare go up to the attic for months. Even now, 2 years later, I still can't sleep. When I hear the house creak at night, every Christmas, when the lights twinkle on the roof, my chest tightens. Throughout my life, I eagerly awaited the moment to hear a word. Mama heard it, a significant day. Before I tell you what happened to me, welcome to the Story from Shadows. If you crave true horror stories, subscribe now and join our community of the brave. Now, let's get into our first story. My relationship with my husband was tense because we remained married for 5 years, but God still hasn't given us children and we're going through financial problems. One day, my husband surprises me that he needs a modest hut in the village of Hadiye. Something like this is as much money as we can spend on a romantic vacation and get our relationship back to the way it was before. When we first arrived, I was shocked by the smell of the place. It was weird and uncomfortable. It was like the smell of roses that were rotten. The owner of the place was not friendly. She handed me the keys without smiling. She told me in a sharp tone, "I hope you don't get close to anything. It's not your business." He pressed Jamid's hands with her cold hands, as if she were warning me of something. "In need. In this house. You may feel that you are not alone." Then she looked at the bedroom. When she looked at the room, she found an old children's bed that was dark and old wood, as if it had years left. His appearance was not consistent with the place. I felt that I was not comfortable with his presence, and I still would have explained it more. But my husband arrived. "Why does this place have such peculiar decor?" My husband said this while he was unloading the bag. I don't know why my heart stopped at that time. I felt that Ruki was dry, but he remained silent so as not to be surprised by the surprise he gave me. From the first night it was fired with a heavy enforcement sound, was the sound of Josie's breathing. It's not enough. There was the sound of someone else's breathing. Ha ha ha. Her voice was different and Jay was far away, a little from the corner of the room. And then my place froze. He had an unclear voice. Sound is like something moving. Moonlight shadowed the world while reflecting on the old crib, which moved steadily. Empty of presence, it swayed as though driven by unseen laborers. I kept trying to find explanations for what was happening. I told myself that I was definitely moving because of the wind, or maybe I couldn't see well from the darkness, but at that time his movement increased more and more, becoming a regular and deliberate movement, not a random shape. So I opened my mouth because I couldn't. I was a worker and looked at him and I was terrified. Abruptly halting, it acknowledged my gaze. It stopped upon realizing I noticed. His introduction, then how did you sleep? It is the morning when we have breakfast. My husband told me that I was a stupid worker with incomprehensible words all night while I was sleeping. What were you saying? The house seemed empty, yet carried an unusual aura of occupancy. At noon, my husband went out to buy some orders and I found myself alone at home. I was very curious to go and look at the bed as if it attracted me. The first time I touched it, I found the wood with new scratches on it. Was someone trying to get out of it? I noticed the presence of a strange substance that was warm, but I don't know exactly what this is. That night, my husband and I sat in a romantic seat and he told me that he knew that I was sad because of his failed pregnancy attempt last year and the fetus that died in my stomach, so that we must be treated and try again. He is in the middle of a place talking. We heard him pouring like a spring baby coming from the bedroom. You listened to us, did you? Surprised, I realized this wasn't fantasy. We woke in suspense to find answers. We are walking towards the house. I missed the baby. He was more and more like a child crying strong C's. When we entered and arrived in front of the room, does the door open alone? Observed the bed shuddering. Attempting to decipher, it dragged into a scene of strange sheets. Then she shut up. For 6 seconds, Sam said nothing. Before the echo begins, chuckles. Othman's eerie voice escalated, a mix of screams tangled with indistinct speech. A chilling curse descended upon me. Why am I alone? Its words begged invitation. Then the whole house lights went out. While we were in the darkness, I felt a small, rough, and very cold hand. I reached out and grabbed my leg, and at that time I screamed out above me. My husband spoke frankly, and we ran as hard as we could in the darkness to get out of the house. When we arrived at the door and tried to open it, we found it locked. He is not satisfied with the final opening. Rushing to the rear exit. Hearing noises, my husband sought another way out. Following closely, I felt paralyzing terror. We heard the sound of something crawling on the ground, and the sound saw a small scratch on the ground. Then I heard a terrifying whisper. Mama. Don't leave me alone. Broken emotions reverberated. Scared. Hey, Mama. I tried to calm myself down and ignore what I heard until we got out. And Josie was trying to open the door. I tried to be quick. Suddenly I looked behind Raya. Did you find this thing closer to me and more? Quickly, please come after me. Then he will come close to me and whisper in my heart. Mama, I'm shivering. Ice grips me. Before I screamed, I finally found my husband opening the door and we went out, running quickly, running and running far in the darkness and cool. The important thing is to stay away from this responsible house. It is the first time after us that the house is lighted in. Josie opened the car door safely. His hand was twitching while he was turning the key. The motor was broken and the car could not be seen. I poured it on the house. I found him standing in the net. He looks at me. He, despite the distance glimpsed, the terrifying faintness rests. Mama reached and saved us. Her time, finally the car moved and we walked fast that way. A shared astonishment prevailed. Journeying onward, silence blanketed us entirely. After a week, I didn't know. I stopped thinking about what happened. I preferred to search the internet for any information related to this house, until I found news 30 years ago that they found the body of a baby girl in this house. It was rotten and had the days of a child who died alone from cold and hunger. And the details of the news. She was the ugliest. Father and mother fought the mother. I walked and left the child at home with his father. But the father also left on the basis that she would come back. Love in them. Sabu returned alone, crying to the point of barking. He died afraid, sore and cold. That day I preferred to cry all day. How? Are there people whose hearts are this hard? This is what I hope from God, even if only one child, and they left their child to die alone. I told my husband, whom I knew, and he told me that we should move on and forget what happened. But how can I advise you like that? Be careful who you talk to on Facebook. Malicious people may ask you for private information to commit crimes. In fact, that's what we're going to find out in these 4 scary stories that can happen to you too. So get comfortable, turn off the lights, and make sure your doors are securely locked. And let's get started. A few years ago, my girlfriend, who is now my wife, and I were selling some of our old stuff. After we moved to another apartment, one of those objects was our old TV. We had put an ad on eBay and another on that Facebook marketplace thing, which was something new. At that time, we decided to wait and see what kind of offer we were going to receive. My wife was almost certain that she had found a fairly decent buyer who would come to the apartment himself to pick up the TV, which was quite convenient. But I got a message from someone who, although he couldn't pay the price we were asking, made us an offer we couldn't refuse. This was an older man who seemed to live alone with his dog and whose television had recently broken down and he could not afford to buy a new one. He said he could pay about 70% of the price we were asking and that he would pay us the rest with plumbing services if we ever needed them. I ended up having an emotional chat with that guy. It reminded me of an old uncle of mine, and I immediately liked it. He'd just been through a rough patch and it wasn't his fault. If anyone deserved a little kindness, it was definitely him. After a brief chat with my wife, we decided to bring the TV directly to her house for free. However, we knew this man wouldn't accept our quality right away, or almost no chance of that happening given how kind he was. After insisting, he agreed. However, she kindly asked us to wait 3 weeks before dropping her off at her house as she needed time to gather the money. But in itself, that wasn't a problem for us. We were happy to help him, wrote down his address and everything else and promised to keep in touch in a few weeks. The days passed and my partner and I decided to bring the television to her house on a Saturday morning. Before leaving, we called the man to let him know we were coming, but he didn't answer. We've tried him 123 times, but he's still not picking up. It may seem selfish, but the TV was already packed and taking up space in our house. So even though it wasn't responding, we decided to go anyway and maybe leave the TV with one of its neighbors. On the one hand, it also suited us. I thought he was so kind that my wife and I wanted to give him the TV. We wouldn't have to go through all the potential inconvenience of refusing to take the money. Anyway, we're going to this man's address by keeping the TV in the car. I go out, climb through the entrance and knock on the door. No one answers. At that moment I lay back and look out his bedroom window, to see if there's any lights on or anything. Then when I look I see all those little black spots on the blinds, and on the edge of the window. I wondered, but what is that? Thinking it might be bits of dirt or something. One of the small pieces moves quickly and suddenly. What do insects do? And that's when I realized all those spots were actually flies, very large flies that were clustered on the window. What the hell? But what is that? That was my first reaction. I didn't understand right away why they were grouped together and formed like spots. It's not like watching a fly alone. There were so many that my brain could not calculate what my eyes saw. Then I immediately understood what was wrong and a horrible feeling came over me. There were so many that I thought something must be dead in that apartment, and in that case someone had died in a horrible way. And in fact he was the old man we were attached to throughout the saga of getting rid of our old TV. The whole thing was horrible. It was we who called the police, and also the fire department, who broke down the door of his apartment. Once they opened the door, a strong smell began to spread through the street. It was the most horrible thing I've ever experienced in my life. I know this guy wasn't exactly my best friend, but I feel like even though we only exchanged a few messages, we got to know him. He was a bon vivant, independent, and I'm pretty sure he was also a veteran. Those scavenger flies so big and full I didn't even recognize right away that they were flies as huge as they were. They had reproduced and fed on rotting flesh. The same guy I'd fallen in love with a few weeks before. It just scares me to imagine what death is like. If the idea of what happens to us when we die is quite intimidating, but it's how sudden and seemingly random death can be. With all those little sinister details, for example, I couldn't get the image of those flies in the window as if they were his ghost out of my head. I don't know what. Maybe we leave a little piece of ourselves behind when we die, but I have this image of flies, which was something very, very ugly. In 2016, the Xbox One S was released, which was basically an Xbox capable of playing in 4K. Not to be confused with the Xbox XYs launched last year. That was 2 years ago when the Facebook Marketplace was just starting. I bought the new edition of the console and wanted to get rid of the old one. I chose Facebook Marketplace because I didn't have an eBay account and it seemed like the easiest thing. In short, this was opening me up to one of the scariest experiences of my life. So I posted an ad for my Xbox One stick setting a reasonable price of about $100. Then I sat down and waited for the requests for information. As you can imagine, it didn't take long for the internet to pull out all the anonymous crazies who told me that $30 would be a more than reasonable price. Could he leave the console at his house, which in that case was in the neighboring state? No one was seriously interested. From what I understand, it was a 4-year-old console. I'd have been lucky to sell it at this point. So when the mother of a child told me that he was very sick and that maybe I could give him a discount, I thought, sure. Why not? The first message from the boy's mother was very long and told a very sad story about her 10-year-old son having a rare disease with little chance of surviving. I forgot the name of the disease, but I googled it and it turned out to be real with severe symptoms. I probably shouldn't have called it a sad story, but that's exactly what I thought at first. In exchanging messages with the lady, I noticed that for me it was only trivial. He could make his family much happier. Went from a strange indifference to a serious commitment that for that child would be a Christmas he would never forget. After a few days of talking to this lady, I decided to give her this gift for free. He didn't need money and could enjoy the good karma he earned. It was a little embarrassing to admit how deep I had sunk into all this. I bought high-quality bubble wrap and cardboard boxes to ship electrical appliances. I wanted to be Santa Claus for the kids. That year, as crazy as it sounds, my charitable plan made me feel good about myself. So when it started to fall apart, I didn't want to believe it. When it came time to get that lady's mailing address, there were some inconsistencies that caught my attention, but didn't immediately arouse my suspicions. And for example, at first he gave me one address, then he gave me another. When asking her for confirmation, confront her on the subject. But he said he lived in a complex where packages were stolen. Evidently neither of them wanted to risk the Xbox being stolen, so they gave me the address of one of their friends who could receive it safely. A totally credible excuse, don't you? She was a single mother living in a tough neighborhood and I was giving her a hand. Maybe I should have noticed the warning signs, but I felt too self-sufficient to notice. I stumbled because the lady said her children would start medical treatment for their illness. She mentioned a specific date for the start of treatment, and it turned out to be the same day I was about to send the package. I have the console packed with controls, cables, and games appropriate for the child's age. That's what I thought. I imagined it was a stressful time for her to see her son being examined by various health professionals. It must probably be a burden to her. Could sending a letter to the consul that day cheer her up? I tried to keep the surprise, but I've never been very good at that, and I also wanted to enjoy a little of my own generosity. So I sent the single mother a message on Facebook. Hello, today I'm sending the package. I just wanted to make sure I have the correct address. She replies to me, oh my God, you just made my day, you're a sweetheart. I answer, no problem. I hope it reaches you without problems. The timing is perfect. Because Franklin starts his therapy next month, the following month I review the conversation and find the message where she mentions the 25th. We exchange messages that day too. I'm obviously quite confused and I don't have any major suspicions yet. So I say, oh, I thought she was starting her therapy today. She explains to me, it's not next month, like she didn't tell me about 25 at all. It was only when I confronted her on that subject that she told me, yeah, we had to move some dates. It's my fault for not telling you, for at that moment my spider senses start to tingle. So I decide to ask him if there's anything he's not telling me. She obviously says no, but I decide it would be better to talk about it over the phone, so I insist on calling her. She responds like, I know it's real, and she seemed busy and impatient, so I thought she just gave her a hard time. Everything would have gone well if she hadn't made a fatal mistake. After apologizing for wasting his time and before hanging up, she mentions that Freddy will be happy with the Xbox. Freddy a week calling Franklin his son, and now it turns out to be Freddy. I'm not even sure I could blame the self-corrector. It was just a damn phone call. I called back and confronted her with her bluff. I didn't know for sure, but I acted like I did. I told her I knew she was a con artist and would report her to the police. At first there was some resistance and denial, but I could feel her integrity crumbling with each accusation, and she finally gave in when she did. It was so cruel that it almost left me speechless for 1 minute. It was a complete Jekyll and Hyde transformation of that kind single mother, pretending to be the real soulless con artist she was. Although I unmasked her, she called me gullible for believing her in the first place. He also told me sad, pathetic, and sensitive for wanting to give my things to a child who might not leave and take advantage of that. In that speech he told me that people like me would always be worthless, pathetic idiots. I was just trying to stay calm. I warned her that I would report her on Facebook and send screenshots of her profile and photos to the police before sharing her profile on Facebook groups, where I was a member, to warn about possible scams. But of course, it wasn't the real profile, of course. There were 20 others. At least that's what she said. My profile was real and everything I told him about me was true. The psycho knew what I looked like, she knew where I lived, and she knew all kinds of things about me, and I knew absolutely nothing about her, except that she was willing to lower herself even further to get what she wanted. And besides, he wouldn't hesitate to make terribly graphic threats of violence against me and my family. And as silly as it sounds, that was at the time when my sister and cousin appeared on my profile as members of my immediate family. And that was what shocked me the most, having been foolish enough to put information about my closest family ties on a silver platter. The scammer told me that she was a fool if she believed the police could do anything against her, and that if she received news from the police, she would send her boyfriend after my family. I didn't know if the threat was real, but having access to his profile, it made me feel anxious and very guilty. If they ended up getting hurt by something I did or didn't do, I don't think I would have been able to live with myself. Obviously, that all ended when I blocked the scammer and contacted my cousins and sister to tell them to make her profile private. I was honest with them. I told them that I had been the victim of a scam, and that I was afraid that my personal information was compromised. The scammer had impersonated someone using their photos, profile, and name. The thought of her using one of our photos for a scam profile gave me chills. This case is by far the worst experience I've had online. And not just now, I'm very careful. When it comes to interacting with strangers on the internet, I recommend you do the same. A while ago, I saw an ad on the Facebook marketplace for a woman who was giving away free gerbils. Apparently her male and female had had a large litter. Since there were too many for her, she was looking for someone to give them to. You should know that in this animal, the mother eats the babies if she thinks she won't be able to take care of them. As I knew it well, I contacted the lady to save the babies. The woman turned out to be a widow who had initially bought the gerbils to keep her company. I told myself it was quite unusual that she wouldn't have bought a cat or a dog if she was lonely. But hey, everyone to their own. No, I'm not the type to judge. Also, she sounded very nice when I spoke to her on the phone to make an appointment. I prepared a straw cage to take the gerbils home, and my dad and I went to his house. When we arrived at his door, we had a bad feeling. At first, he didn't answer right away when we knocked. Then, when he finally opened the door, we discovered an old woman in a sorry state. One of his eyes was swollen and full of blood, and he had some kind of very disgusting yellow substance that was pooling in the corner of his eye. My dad and I were kind and acted normal so as not to bother or offend her. Surely she was very sick and knew it. But when she invited us in, we understood how she had become sick. His little house stank. It was like the worst smell I had ever smelled in my life. Gerbils were everywhere, but really everywhere. And like her owner, she wasn't healthy either. Only from the gerbils that roamed the kitchen could I see that many of them no longer had fur in some parts. Some had painful bumps on their legs or backs. Then, when he invited us into his living room for a cup of tea, we realized that it was even worse inside. My dad and I looked at each other and immediately understood without saying anything. We had to make up an excuse not to stay long. I felt like I was getting sick. It was disgusting. There was excrement everywhere, in every corner and under the plinths. He was not surprised that this lady had fallen ill to buy at the store. Then he understood immediately.